5 years later, and one question still refuses to go away. Were the events surrounding COVID simply the result of panic, incompetence, corporate greed? Or is there a much bigger plan, a much bigger story that has never properly been investigated? Billions were made, governments imposed unprecedented restrictions, dissenting voices were censored, scientific debate was more often than not shut down rather than debated. And today, some of the biggest questions still remain unanswered. In this interview, Rupert Lowe sits down for a conversation that ventures into territory most politicians and media organisations won't touch. Together they examine the claims about the mRNA technology, gain of function, excess deaths and the handling of care homes. Not to forget pharmaceutical profits, government decision making, and the possibility that what we've been told is only half the story. To be absolutely clear, this conversation explores allegations, competing theories, and unresolved questions. It is not presented as proof of any particular claim. The purpose is to examine ideas that continue to be debated and to ask whether or not enough has been done to establish the full truth. And you may disagree with old Rupert, or you may not disagree with old Rupert, or you may be somewhere in the middle. But either way you look at this, the one thing that should unite all of us is if governments, pharmaceutical industries and public institutions make mistakes, or worse, then those responsible should be held accountable. So, let's hear the conversation.
Was COVID about money, or was it about some attempt to control population, to limit growth down the line, to plant, a long-term sort of gene therapy within people so that as cancer rates rise, there's no obvious link to it? I don't know. What do you think was it simply money and
I don't think
profit,
it was,
or was there something greater to it?
Let's put it this way. I keep alive in my mind a spectrum of possible explanations. The best possible explanation, the least horrifying, is that a psychopathic pharma industry decided that the mRNA platform was the ultimate cash cow, that they didn't care how many people died as a result of their plan, and that they used an existing emergency to speed that platform past safety testing that the platform itself could never have gotten through under normal circumstances.
Which they did.
Right. That's the best.
And some of them made a lot of money.
A lot of money was made, and the number of mRNA shots that are headed our way is, if people understood it, they would know why we have to actually adjudicate the crimes of COVID. But again, that's the best case scenario based on what we are certain of at this point. There are much darker possibilities here. One is that both the virus and the vaccine are stochastically life-shortening. That someone may have decided to solve the problem of governmental commitments by effectively culling the elderly and the vulnerable before they became costly.
We had a case of the government releasing infected patients into care homes. A bit like I say, sending the, Francis Drake sent the fire ships into the Armada. They literally released them. This is Hancock and this woman, Amanda Pritchard, released them into the care homes. And a lot of the care homes were then ravaged with COVID.
Yes, they were. Now, there's a question about whether that was done in order to jack up the numbers of COVID victims, in order to make the pandemic, the so-called pandemic, more terrifying than it actually was. Don't know. But then...
It's too big to think that they would be that evil. But in order to I'll tell you what they did here to make the numbers look bigger, was they said if you died of COVID, you didn't have to have an autopsy. So it was much easier for the medical profession to sign off that it was a COVID death.
Well, there were 100 tricks that they used to increase the number of apparent deaths. I mean, people were, dying of
midazolam and morphine, who knows, was that killing them?
Ventilators,
was that killing them? Midazolam and morphine, where does the truth lie again? It's very difficult to say.
There was a tremendous amount done to inflate the numbers of seeming COVID victims. But I will also say there's one, at the other end of the spectrum from this was just, nakedly about profit. There's the very troubling fact that the mRNA COVID shots, if you got 2 or more of them, they triggered the production of a class of antibody that actually turns down immunity rather than up. Now, the problem with that is, A, we now know that the virus and, by extension, the shots were part of a bioweapons program, dual-use research.
Can I just ask, is that true for so if you have 2 gene therapies, which is the Pfizer and the Moderna, is it true if you had the AstraZeneca and then you had a Pfizer, would that trigger the same response? Because one's a viral vector drug, isn't it?
Well, yeah, adenovirus vectored. I do not believe the adenovirus vectored shot triggers the same response. But of course...
But it did cause some damage.
Oh, a lot of damage. There were quite a number of injured people, though I think it was less damaging than the mRNA. But in any case, the production of this IgG4 antibody class creates the hazard that if somebody wanted to bioengineer another virus and put the spike protein on it just as a flag, they could trigger the immune systems of anybody who had that shot to turn themselves down. So in other words, you've got bioweapons scientists who delivered a shot that causes all of the people who got it to be more vulnerable to a future engineered pathogen. Was that an accident? I don't know. It seems strange.
You'd hope not, wouldn't you, Brett?
I would hope it was an accident, but I can't convince myself that it was. Because basically the point is they have solved one of the problems that bioweapons manufacturers have never been able to solve before, which is to have a dangerous pathogen for which you have a population that is not vulnerable. The problem is, instead of doing it the way you classically think you would do it, which is to provide a vaccine that creates immunity, they provided a vaccine that creates vulnerability. That is a very strange thing for them to have accomplished in the inverse by accident.
And the other thing that's not clear, it's clearly a man-made virus, but was it genuine, a Chinese error escaping from the Wuhan lab? Why were they fiddling around with all these dangerous viruses, or was it part of this bigger scheme that you're talking of?
Well,
which would really test one's belief in the way in which we're governed.
I worry about it all because clearly the virus was an American product. Was that American product then actually sent to China, and did it leak from the Wuhan Institute by accident? Was this released on the Wuhan Institute's doorstep in order to pin their fingerprints to it? And the one thing that worries me about that interpretation is that the Chinese behaved guilty. If the Chinese were innocent, if it was dropped on Wuhan's doorstep, you would have expected them to say, hey, wait a minute, why don't you come in and take a look at our freezers? This isn't our virus. But they didn't. So anyway, one has to be...
Where's the truth lie?
We don't know, but I would say you have to keep open a spectrum of possibilities. And to your point earlier, I wouldn't put any of it past them. We're dealing with people who are clearly perfectly comfortable causing human deaths of innocent people. What else they're capable of, I couldn't say.